Hello, my name is Sheila and I would like to welcome you to my podcast All About You. I love to listen to podcasts and especially conversations with famous people. However, I think everyone has a story to tell. Maybe a place you have visited, a hobby you enjoy, or anything that you feel would be of interest. I want to have conversations with lots of different people and hear their stories. So if you have a story to tell, please contact me on my email, allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com. Well, welcome to the All About You podcast, and today I'm back with Adie to continue our conversation about films and the film industry. The reason I wanted to bring Adie back is because after we had finished the last podcast, Adie gave me so much interesting conversations and details about the film industry that I didn't know, good sources to watch films. I thought we definitely need to bring Adie back. So here we are. So Adie, welcome back.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me back. And I hope I'm not overstaying my welcome with the listeners. But,
no, not at all.
Happy to be here.
Lovely. Okay, so Adie, when we were talking about on the last podcast, we talked about your involvement in the film industry. I went down memory lane with the Saturday morning pictures. And so where are you taking us today?
Well, I think, as you said, we were chatting afterwards and just about the nature of the film industry and where it might be going. As we're recording this, we're still in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and so the nature of watching movies at the cinema is certainly on hiatus and potentially in long-term doubt in terms of how long it might take us all to get used to the idea of sitting in a confined space with hundreds of fellow film goers. But in the meantime, there's still lots of ways and avenues of watching movies, and I think if we just, I can highlight some of my favourites and might give some of your listeners some pointers about where they might want to explore, because there's certainly no shortage of stuff to watch out there. I mean, the most obvious streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime have obviously got lots and lots of movies on them. They've got quite limited in their way. I mean, there's lots when you first join and you think, oh my God, there's so much here to go through. Once you take out the ones that you've seen before, the ones you're not interested in and so on, it can be quite narrow, and they come and go as well. As I think I mentioned in the previous podcast, there's things aren't guaranteed to stay on forever. So it's a case of having to take them or watch them while you can. And I think from my narrow experience, I definitely wouldn't want to present myself as an expert. I think Amazon Prime has the better selection overall in terms of their deep catalogue. Netflix has a lot of new stuff that they're actually developing and producing themselves, which is great. But I think in terms of actually looking at, as I say, deep catalogue, older movies and a bigger selection, Amazon Prime, for my money, is probably a bit better. And Amazon's also got, without it sounding like an advert, they've also got some good links to other movie sites which have additional subscription costs. So be wary of those. But one of those, for instance, that I think we mentioned in passing last time is the BFI website, the British Film Institute. Depending on where you might be listening to this, it may or may not be available. So I'm very wary that it's the World Wide Web, and so not everything is available everywhere. But the British Film Institute service is excellent. They've got a very, very good selection of movies, also with good extras, as they have good introductions by well-respected critics and commentators, and good extra features and documentaries about the movies they have as well.
So can I just backtrack a bit? I mean, I'm not a huge user of Amazon at all. So with the Amazon Prime, it's a subscription service to films, so you download the film, you watch it, and then do you return it, or do you have it for life?
There's a lot of movies on Amazon Prime that are included. So you can just stream them and just watch them.
So if you've got an Amazon Prime account,
yes,
you get the film package.
Yes, and there's lots and lots and lots of stuff.
Right. Okay.
On that. However, they also have portals to other services.
Right.
Like BFI, there's one called Arrow, who have very good cult movies, and there's lots and lots of different, very quite specialist services. Some from across the world, so some of them are. I think there's some Indian movie subscription services, and for those you'll pay, for instance, something like £2 or £3 per movie, and you'll get them for like 48 hours.
Oh right, so you don't get to keep them.
No.
Oh right, okay. So it's a bit like an online blockbuster.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Very much. That's the model they're going on. So you get, I think, 48 hours from the moment you start watching it for the first time. So it's not when you actually sort of select it; it's when you start watching it. So you can pause it overnight if you get sleepy or have anywhere to go. So and that's a good option. Again, bearing in mind the worldwide possible listenership here. If you've got access to it, the Criterion channel is fantastic. Film buffs will be very aware of the Criterion brand of DVDs, and they have their own streaming service in some territories. And again, fantastic extra features with commentaries, interviews with filmmakers, even some of the older, very old movies. They do fantastic restoration work, and I'd very much recommend those for fans of older movies. And you've got these as other services. There's one called Mubi, MUBI, which is quite a limited service, but is actually quite clever. Is they only ever have 31 films available at a time, but every day they take one off and replace it.
So it's like a rolling list then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think like a lot of these services, they're probably about £5 a month. Again, depending on where you're listening to this, it might be different, but I think that tends to be the subscription type price. And so there's always at least one new thing to watch, and that's probably, for most of us, it's the choice that's the problem. Is when you've got the whole history of movies potentially at your fingertips. It's actually the choosing what to watch next is the problem. It's not the fact that there's nothing to watch. It's probably that there's too much to watch. Yeah. So I think the curated aspect of a service like that has actually got a fair bit to recommend it, and they're all very good films. They're sort of quite, it's not random. They tend to be very good classic films, and some newer ones as well. And in the UK, for instance, the Curzon cinema chain has done a very interesting thing, whereas they make their newer films available. It's usually foreign films. They specialise in foreign and art type movies, but you can rent those almost, I think, if not exactly on the day of release at their cinemas. So I think that, again, especially bearing in mind the COVID pandemic at the moment, I think they were doing that even before that they were making it just a choice of how you watch movies. It doesn't actually matter whether you watch them in a cinema or at home. It's just the watching them that's important. And I think that's interesting, and I think it's probably the direction that in the coming years it will probably go to. I think we'll get closer to day and date watching of movies at the cinema or at home. It'll just be a choice that people make, and the price will reflect that, I'm sure.
I mean, this is so opening up my eyes, Adie. I mean, I love going to the cinema. Admittedly, I don't go that often. Yes, I watch films on TV, and I've got a core collection of films or DVDs that I've collected over the years. For example, The Holiday, with Kate Winslet, who I think is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful actress. I will watch that every Christmas and probably 2 or 3 times during the year. Sound of Music, again, a classic. But it's... One of the questions I've got for you is, how do cinemas get particular films? Does a company say, right, every Odeon is going to have this week, we're having this film? Or how does it work with the cinemas? This is what I'm going to show this month. How does that come about?
It's quite an interesting question. There's you have to remember that the film studios own a lot of the cinemas, so that they will actually dictate which movies.
So when we're talking about the big,
So
I don't know what, the Odeons or whatever there are now.
So, and you've got to remember that a lot of the studios are owned by these sort of multinational conglomerates like the Sonys of this world.
Okay.
And they also own the cinemas as well. This is what they call vertical integration.
Right, okay.
Whereby they know exactly what the movies are that are coming, and they say, right, we've got the new, whether it, not in this particular case, but Sony, not particularly Sony, but it would say it's new Star Wars movie and you will show it on so many screens. But they have an open arrangement with each other that they don't hold back their movies from other chains. So you don't get exclusivity. It won't be that for instance, a Harry Potter film will only be shown at Odeon cinemas or View cinemas or whatever. They're all very open with each other in terms of keeping it as an open market. And what they do is that they will, months in advance, if not years, they will set a release schedule, and they will say, right, this big new movie, the big new summer blockbuster is going to be released on June the 15th, and we're going to be putting this many millions of pounds into advertising it, and therefore we want you to set aside 5 screens per multiplex to show it because it's going to be the big movie. Then what happens is it's actually released, and then everything changes, because they don't want to be selling. It's like seats in planes. Once the plane's left the ground, it doesn't matter how many seats are empty or full. You've got that much money, and they don't want to be sending empty seats across the Atlantic, for instance. And it's the same with cinema seats. Is that if a movie underperforms, what you will find is that it gets moved to the smaller screens or taken off altogether. And similarly, if it's incredible success, they will either move to bigger screens or put it on more screens. And it's quite an adaptable process, and it can even happen midweek, is that every individual cinema manager will take it on his own head to actually say, right, I've got more people, I'm having to turn away people from film A, and I haven't got enough seats for film B, so I'm going to swap them around.
So he's got the possibility of
moving
everybody.
The broad plans are made months in advance, but when it is there's the old saying is that no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. It's that kind of idea, is that the plans are made months in advance, but that can change overnight depending on the success or failure of a movie. And again, in these days of social media, a movie can get a bad word of mouth virtually overnight. Back in the old days, word of mouth meant something. It meant that I'd go and see a film and I'd tell my friends at work the next day, and they may go and see it the next week. Nowadays, it's across the world.
So with social media, they can make or break a film so quickly.
Yes,
just
absolutely.
Using social media.
Yeah, and you've got sites like Rotten Tomatoes is the most famous.
Yeah, we use that.
Where they aggregate all of the critical scores from across the world and all the media to give it a fresh or rotten score according to the average marks across the world. And there's talk that it's too powerful, is that a movie can only have been out 24 hours and instantly is being thought of as a failure, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's not a failure because it's a bad film, it's a failure because a very small comparatively small number of people may have watched it and not liked it, which is their right, of course, but it potentially skews the audience.
So it can be such a numbers game, as much as all the effort and the money has been put behind the film, it can be screwed at the end through
so you spend 3 years making a film, and within 24 hours it's a failure. It's what in America it's called when a movie opens. Is they say if it opens, that means you've got good numbers. And the worst call any producer can ever get is from the cinema executives will say it didn't open, and it's just overnight it can be known as a failure or a hit. Of course, it can happen the other way. And then you get what are called sleeper hits, which are the ones that start slowly but gradually do. And even nowadays, it can happen where it starts slowly but gradually actually gains viewers as the weeks and months go on. The best example in recent years was The Greatest Showman, with Hugh Jackman.
Oh right,
which started out really slowly and that was looking like a flop, But as it went on, is people really did tell their friends, this movie's fantastic, you've got to go and see it. And people did, and it ended up being one of the biggest hits of its year, and is now sort of like one of the favourite musicals of recent years.
And I haven't seen it.
There you go. So that's your first recommendation for our chat today.
I think I've seen La La Land, but I haven't seen the greatest. But everyone's been going crazy about the songs from it as well, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's then you start going into the overlaps with other media. You've got things like Spotify and YouTube and so on, where it's now easier to actually find those songs, like Frozen, for instance.
I mean, musical type films seem to be having a resurgence of interest.
Yeah, musicals never...
I mean, it's like we go back to Mamma Mia, the ABBA story. I mean, I think we've had 2 Mamma Mias now.
Yes.
Yeah. And that to me is a musical. I mean, I love the old musicals, the old black and whites I used to watch when I was a teenager. So to me, Mamma Mia is a musical. As you say, The Greatest Showman. Is it all happening in the musical?
I think it's very... They never went away on stage. I think that's what's interesting, is that movie musicals started going downhill in the 70s. This is a longer conversation, but the received wisdom is that movies got a lot more serious in the 70s. It was all very much about realism, and that didn't really jibe with musicals, because musicals and people bursting out into song in the middle of a conversation,
fabulous,
yes, but it's not real. It's not.
It's not everybody's thing, is it?
Yeah, and so in the 70s and in the 80s, it was very, very rare to see musicals out there, and certainly not successful ones. But on stage, they've always been the bread and butter of the West End and Broadway. Musicals have always stayed big. And I think in the last probably 15, 20 years, they've started trying to move back into movie musicals. But it's still a big gamble. Is the Cats musical last year was a huge, huge flop.
And I loved it. When I heard, I was talking to my friends, been to see the new Cat. Oh my God, it's dreadful. I thought it was genius. I would buy the DV, I would watch it over and over again. I mean, for me, one of the best things during pandemic, as in looking for a positive, is Andrew Lloyd Webber on YouTube was doing a Friday night, The Show Must Go On. And he did Phantom of the Opera, and it was an anniversary edition from the Royal Albert Hall. Oh my God, that was the best thing I have seen in years. And then he did several. But that, I mean, I dragged out my original DVD of Phantom that I've had for years, looking for all the music on YouTube and stuff. I thought that was brilliant. But he decided to do a Friday night, and you could donate, because obviously the actors and film industry, theatre industry, it all ground to a halt. And it was so successful. You got the little chat thing of people from all around the world. I thought that was genius.
Yeah, and another big thing that happened this year was Hamilton, because Hamilton's the biggest stage musical in decades on Broadway and in London as well. And they released a filmed stage version of it that was actually made with the original cast some years ago. And that was released on Disney Plus, which is another service we didn't mention earlier. And was a massive, massive success, just to be able to see the original cast members and to be able to watch it every day. And bearing in mind that tickets go for like $1,000 on Broadway, to be able to just watch it twice a day, 10 times a day if you want to, I think is fabulous. And that's something new that may happen, because a lot of stage plays are filmed for reference. Is that they, early on in a play's run, it won't be intended for release, but they will film it with a professional crew, so that for touring purposes, that touring companies can watch it and say, this is what they did on the West End, and this is what we're going to try and copy when we're touring around the country, and you get an impression of what the show is like. And they actually released the Hamilton version of that. And it had very good production values. I don't want to make it sound like it was a home movie. It was very, very nicely done. But I think that those, again, partly it's filling a gap in terms of there not being enough content around at the moment, but it's also to supply demand for people who love musicals and want to watch them in that context. But as I say, it's certainly not a guaranteed money spinner. As the musicals these days, they're binary. They work or they don't. People like them or people don't. And I think it's interesting what you said, that you loved it, Cats, despite it having a really bad reception. One of my things I say all the time, and I say this even as a film buff myself, is that you're not obliged to like or not like anything. Is anybody, is what you respond to as a viewer, or what the individual responds to. You don't have to go along with what the critics say or even what your friends say. If it works for you, it works. And that's really important, because I think I do feel sometimes with some critics, they make you feel as if, or so you read some books about the best films ever made, and they try and make you feel that you're somehow deficient as a film viewer or as a human being if you don't think these movies are the best movies ever.
I remember when Top Gun came out. I mean, I think the song was Take My Breath Away or Take Your Breath Away. Huge hit. I was so sick of the song, I wouldn't go and see the film. But I saw Top Gun, I don't know how many years ago, and I thought, that was actually quite a good film. But I was so late to the party because the song, I was just so sick. And I thought, if this song is going all the way through the film, I'm going to shoot myself.
Well, films, that's the thing, is films, when they're released, they're around forever. And you sometimes can get caught up in the hype, badly or well. As I say, you can get sick of them.
I must admit, I'm not one to rush off to see the big blockbuster on the first week of opening. Absolutely not. I'll probably pick it up 5 years later.
I was like that with Grease back in the day, as I was so sick of John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John that the thought of actually paying money at the cinema to see them do it for an hour and a half was the last thing on my mind.
But that film, though, I mean, how old is that film?
Well, I've got 1978 in my head.
I was going to say, it's got to be late 70s. And that film is still as popular. I think they made a second one with Michelle Pfeiffer, which I'm not a great fan of. If a film's been really successful, like Bridget Jones, that type of thing, okay, do I want to go and see the second one? And I think, for example, Sex in the City. Love the series, love the first film, the second one, sharp intake of breath here. Some things, I've done a good job, step away.
Yeah, leave it alone.
Leave it alone. Don't try and tinker and stuff. And yeah, so, I mean, I know I'm referring to very mainstream films because that's the type of stuff I guess I go for. When I go to cinema, I want to be entertained, i.e. with the musical, have a little cry, a little rom-com. James Bond, no, because I just never understand them, and I feel exhausted when I feel like I've been through the washer when I come out, because they're just bang, bang, crash, crash, kill, kill. Not my thing at all.
No, but I think that's another thing, though, is about the environment, and about not every film is for every occasion. There are films that you watch with a beer and a pizza and your mates, and you're shouting at the screen and you want things blowing up, and that's great. And there are movies for quiet contemplation. There are ones for sort of like making you think about life and the universe in general, and about your place in it maybe, and about and things that just make you feel about yourself and about your life. And
I mean, I guess that's the thing with cinema, isn't it? Because we do have the social media, because you can download or rent with Amazon Prime, you can find whatever you want for you at that moment, whether you want to laugh, whether you want to feel cosseted, whether you want to feel king of the world with an action film.
Yeah,
it's all there for you.
Yeah, and I think this comes back, I think, to something we said previously, is that's the thing. The great thing about seeing a movie in the cinema is that you are locked away. You're not thinking about the washing up. You're not doing the ironing. It's actually you and the screen and yourself for those 90 minutes or 2 hours. And really allowing yourself to escape and get lost. And I think that's so I don't think the cinema experience, and the same to an extent, that's the same with the theatre as well, and also the shared experience is knowing you're going through that with possibly a few hundred people, that's actually that's accessing something different, really primal inside you. It's 100 people laughing or gasping in wonderment or crying.
Exactly.
Is knowing that you and all of these people are feeling the same thing at the same time. That's real. That's stuff that goes back to cavemen stuff about real deep inside us.
You're feeling part of a group of people with sort of a common bond.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic, and you get a little bit of that even when it's a bunch of you watching the Blues Brothers on video, and you go,
which I think I found out talking to my husband over Christmas. I haven't seen that either. I'm going to have such a long list of films that I should have seen.
I'll go back to saying there's no films you should see, but I think there's a lot of stuff out there that a lot of people have watched and found to be good movies, and I think if you go on the Internet Movie Database, the imdb.com, they've got scores against their movies. As a general rule, the highest scored movies are usually pretty good. Nobody should feel obliged to like a movie. If I had one big movie confession, I don't quite get Casablanca. It's clearly a great movie. I really like Humphrey Bogart. It's a lot of it I admire, but I don't get that fundamental response that clearly lots of people do. I'm not going to feel guilty about that. I respect and admire it, and I've watched it numerous times. And I keep thinking, no, I still don't quite get it. And you're not obliged to. Nobody should tell you what to like and what not to like. Yeah. But I think you should also open yourself up and say, right, this doesn't sound like my thing, but lots of people really like it. I think I ought to give it a chance. And I think giving it a chance is the thing, is it's not doing it while you're doing the ironing or scrolling through your phone. It's actually sort of saying, right, I am prepared to give this long Japanese movie from 1954 a go. I'm going to watch it and I'm going to dedicate myself to it for a while, and hopefully I will get what everybody else gets. And that's, I think, to give yourself, open yourself up to something new. And
I think that gives you, yourself a good idea to, as you say, sit down, put the phone down, put the iPad down, make yourself a cup of tea or a glass of wine, and enjoy that experience. In your own
surrender to it. I think that's what you've got to do. Is you've got to honour what was intended. You're meant to be watch it, not half watch it. I mean, you do what you like, but you're not really getting the full benefit.
That's true.
If you don't really give yourself to it, which, as I say, doesn't oblige you to.
There's one thing I want to cover with you, Adie. Just before we started recording, you were talking about films on YouTube.
Yeah, well, that's another. Well, there you go. This is where you get into the really esoteric stuff. And again, if you want to be a student and if you want to sort of like check out new things or old things, very old things, is that movies do go out of copyright after a certain period of time, and you find these days a lot of old movies are on YouTube, free to watch, especially old silent movies, which I'll admit is not for everybody, but a lot of them are made very relevant. They're sort of like they're recoloured and retinted and done with new soundtracks. Because they're open, they're a great opportunity for musicians to write new soundtracks and perform them with old movies. And a lot of what's called pre-code movies. Here's a bit of movie history, is that when films first started in the sort of like early 20th century, it was a bit of a Wild West, as people just made movies and they showed them. And then talkies came in the late 20s. And again, there was no rules about what you could show and what you couldn't. And then suddenly, in the early 30s in America, this thing came in called the Hays Code, Hays. And it was very much a moral code about what you could and couldn't show on screen. And it was things like showing unmarried people in the same bed. And even, and this is where
a flash of ankle.
Yes, and if a woman and man were on a bed, they both had to have one foot on the floor at all times.
Well, that's how you stop becoming pregnant, apparently.
Exactly.
No, that is just something.
Yeah, yes, for our viewers, so don't try this at home.
Yeah, we'll cut this, but don't try this at home.
But it's things like you couldn't allow criminals couldn't be seen to get away with crimes. And things like that.
So moral code.
There's a huge list of things that couldn't be included. But anyway, but movies before this code came in, which is basically before 1934, were a lot racier. And you had a lot of very strong female characters who were clearly, not explicitly, but clearly sleeping with a lot of men, for instance, and criminals getting away with it. And so movies made sort of between 1930 and 1934 Very worth seeking out because they're quite eye-opening and don't tend to be seen these days. And so there's interesting stuff out there to go looking for. And one of the good things about YouTube, and I think we said it before about, once you start watching things on any of the streaming services, they'll start recommending the kind of things you'll like. And YouTube is great for that. You'll watch one thing, and down the right-hand side there'll be another 10 things that it will lead you on to. And there's a lot of interesting stuff to search out. And I'm always wary, and I think I said it in my previous podcast, is to make it sound like work or make it sound like you're a student again. It's not, I say things like being a student of film. It's just about finding stuff you enjoy and giving it a go, and opening yourself up to the new things that are available out there that you may not have seen. As time goes on, I do feel in some ways for maybe younger viewers who are just coming in, they've got so much stuff to plough through, decades and decades of film history to theoretically plough through. But conversely, it's easier now than it ever was.
It's more accessible.
Yeah, is being a film buff before home video came in, VHS in the sort of late 70s, was hard work. You had to actually actively pound the streets looking for repertory cinemas to show these movies that you might have read about. And maybe in the big centres like London or Birmingham or Manchester or wherever, that was possibly doable. But there were lots of places in the country where you might read about some movie and you'd never get to see it until maybe it turned up 10 o'clock at night on BBC Two. And and even then if you had to stay up and watch it because you couldn't record it, it was quite that was quite an undertaking to really be a film buff. And that's why novelizations of films, you'd buy the book because it was your only way of reliving the movie. Now these sorts of things we take for granted now, that any in real terms, any movie you want, you can either order the DVD and it will be on your mat in the morning, or it's already on a streaming service and you can watch it within 5 minutes. We could mention a movie now on this podcast and within 5 minutes we could be sitting on the sofa watching it. That's really quite impressive but it's a different way of watching movies to how it used to be. And it's better, I don't want to sound, I'm very aware of sounding like a grumpy old man at times, but that's fantastic. I think that kind of accessibility and the ability to, really watch whatever you want, pretty much whenever you want, shouldn't be looked on as anything other than a great thing. And so I think as long as you don't narrow yourself down to too small a furrow of the type of movies you watch, then there's a whole host of stuff out there to be enjoyed. So go out and enjoy it. That would be my message.
Oh, that's brilliant. We're just entering 2021 now, so hopefully this year is going to be a lot easier for everybody. Hopefully we're going to be back in the cinema for those that like to go and have their full experience. You've given us lots of information about streaming websites, Amazon Prime, and particularly YouTube for me. I just love YouTube, and the fact that all these old films are on there is absolutely brilliant. So I know, Adie, when I listen to this podcast, I will be there with the pen and paper. All these films that I have been on my radar or have not even come across. Plenty of films to keep me going through 2021. So, Adie, thank you so much. You've opened my eyes. There's been a lot of funny moments, and I've thoroughly enjoyed having you as a guest, Adie. So, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, and thank you very much for having me back.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
For me too, thank you.
Thanks, Adie. I hope you have enjoyed the conversation. Don't forget, if you have a story you would like to tell, please get in touch. My email address is allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com, and thank you for listening.